Thank you for sticking it out all day. I know many of you have been in talks and panels all morning, all afternoon. So thank you for being here. You're in for a treat with this keynote address this afternoon. From Father William Hart McNichols, who I will introduce. He's planning to speak for about an hour, and then we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions, and then we break for the social. Father William Hart McNichols is one of the world's most acclaimed Catholic iconographers and co-author of the new book, All My Eyes See, copies of which can be purchased downstairs at registration. A student of the famed Franciscan artist Robert Lentz, Father McNichols' icons have been honored with exhibitions in major US cities, and he is the subject of a feature-length documentary, The Boy Who Found Gold. Father McNichols was a member of the Society of Jesus from 1968 until 2002. He received a Master's of Fine Arts from the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and from 1983 to 1990, he worked in an AIDS hospice ministry in Manhattan. A prolific illustrator and artist, Father Bill created many compelling and provocative images to call attention to the plight facing people with AIDS during this ministry. In 1993, Father Bill presented Pope John Paul II with an icon during the Pope's visit to Denver. That icon today resides in the Vatican Museum. Father Bill lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. On a personal note, I got to know Father Bill quite well when I was reporting the Plague podcast in my book, Hidden Mercy. He's one of the kindest, warmest people you'll ever have a chance to meet, and a mutual friend of ours described being in his presence as being in the presence of a mystic and a saint, and I couldn't agree more, so I'm glad you'll have an hour or so to spend with him today. Father Bill.
Wow, Michael, now I have to act like a mystic and a saint. How do you do that? But I can probably dispel that by telling you a story of how I was introduced in New Orleans. I was still a Jesuit, and it was in the 2000s. And the Jesuit that invited me there to speak to this many New Orleanian Catholics who were very conservative invited me to, show icons just like today. And I wanted to tell you, relax, it's all pictures. So, I'm going to talk, but you're going to get to see pictures, or else I wouldn't even be up here. But anyway, the night before he took me to his family's house, I had my first Sazerac, which is a New Orleans drink that I loved. Very nice. The next night, I get up here on the stage. He comes up to introduce me, and he said, now, Jesuit words, I'm going to use a few Jesuit words. Course, being in the course, means that, you go from novitiate through philosophy, through theology, through regency, through all of these different things. So that's what he meant. And he goes, when I was in the course, he said, we weren't allowed to go on in art. And I thought, uh-oh. And he said, we couldn't do that. He said, but now I'm going to introduce to you Father Bill McNichols. He's an artist, a sinner, and a bohemian. And there was no clapping. There was a gasp. So I come up thinking I should be dressed like, James Dean or something. And I had a cold, so I was sniffling. And I said, I'm not crying about what he just said. I said, the truth is, I'm just studying to be an artist. I'm not an artist yet. But the other two are true. And the sinner and the bohemian. So it was hard to live that down. So I'm going to take you through some pictures. When I lived in Boston, going to BC for philosophy, they'd say, "Where's Billy?" And somebody'd say, "He's upstairs doing his pitches." And so they'd call me downstairs, and into the real world. So at this point, I've been working 34 years on icons. Before that, I was a children's book illustrator. And before that, I went to Pratt and all these different things. So my life has been spent in art. But this could have gone many different ways, because up to now I've got 343 images and icons. Where's Jim? There he is. Everything to Jim is an icon, and he gets me in so much trouble. I told him the icon police, you've got to watch them, because they are very strict about what's an icon and what isn't an icon. But so I try, because I honor that tradition, I'm not a part of it. I'm from Denver. I'm not from Russia or Greece. So in their minds, in the Orthodox minds, I have no right whatsoever to be doing icons. And what am I, who do I think I am, et cetera, et cetera. But I've moved through things like that before, so I just decided I'll leave it up to God what's an icon and what isn't, and not let people tell me what is or isn't. But I try to call this an image or a painting to distinguish it from something that I consider to be a true icon. And I decided I would get very personal in the beginning, and because of you, because of all you here, I decided I would try to take you a little bit on my journey. Now, I turned 75 in July, and I thought I better announce that, because I thought, I don't think there's too many gay men that are 75 alive. And in my generation, people either died of drugs, which was the big thing during the hippie era, or Vietnam. A lot of my peers were killed in Vietnam, or AIDS. So I'm kind of like a pterodactyl, that just flew in to do this talk. And if you've never seen one before, well, here it is, So my tax man in Taos, Charles Chacon, calls me gingerly to talk about my taxes. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to Georgetown to give a talk." He goes, "Oh, Father Bill, now be sure that you dress nice." He said, "Be sure, wear a suit, wear clerics." He goes, "You got to look preppy. You got to look nice." So this is what I came up with. So now I'm going to get a little serious-er, and I want to kind of set the stage by reading you something from one of my favorite authors about the saints when I was a Jesuit. Joseph Thailenda wrote an entire book about Jesuit saints, but he also wrote this little book about daily, saints of the day. And what he says in the beginning is really my experience and the truth. After a long slump of interest from the late 60s through the 70s and into the 80s, the saints have begun to recapture the minds and hearts of Roman Catholics as sources of inspiration and encouragement. That's the truth. There was a huge slump in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The generation above me had been tortured by the saints. There's Therese, she's perfect. There's Aloysius, he's perfect. And these are your guides. And they were like this, do not mention Therese, do not mention Aloysius. I remember Dan Berrigan saying, Therese, that's all we got when we were kids. He did not want to hear about her. So when I began to do children's books, I began to do stories of the saints, and it just was the wrong time. I mean, they weren't popular, but being an iconographer means you're a saint maker in a certain way. And so I just wanted to tell you that some of that you'll be seeing, but in no way am I saying to you, I want to convert you to what I think or how I think. I'm just sharing with you. And the title is from the book, All My Eyes See, but the subtitle is What I Have Found, What I Have Found. I'm sharing it with you. I'm not pushing it on you, okay? So if you don't agree with it, that's fine with me, but it's helped me, is about all I can say. I made it through because of the saints and help, especially when I was a child and being bullied. The early Roman saints that were children, probably raped before they were killed. Tarcisius, Pancratius, Agnes, Emerantiana. All of those little kids were my friends when I was a little boy, because I didn't have real friends. So when I'd be bullied, I'd think, well, Tarcisius got beat to death for just holding on to the Eucharist, so you're doing okay. And then Agnes, at 11. So the saints began really early for me to be my invisible friends, as Peter Brown says in his extraordinary book, The Cult of the Saints. It's a terrible title. Anytime you use the word cult, everybody runs. But what he's talking about is how the saints came to be liked by people like us. And I'm still kind of a Jesuit in my mind, so I do 1, 2, 3, like Mark was saying yesterday. I can't get that out. I can't get anything Jesuit out of me. I will always be a Jesuit, and they are my family. And I think that's enough about that. So, hold on. I'm terrible at the phone. I wanted to say something about your leaders here, about Janine, about Jim, about Ryan, about Michael, about anybody who's trying to lead you. And I wanted to say something in terms of somebody that I've been really reading a lot, that I read when I was younger, but I've gone back to, and that is Rabbi Abraham Heschel. And Rabbi Heschel has a beautiful book on the prophets that's just riveting. And he also has a book on kind of the essence of Judaism called God Searching for Man, instead of the other way around. And he's electrified me. I've always loved the prophets because they have to do such stupid things in public, They have to wear funny clothes, and they're like St. Francis of Assisi. They have to yell in the streets and all of this, and they don't like it. And yet, that's what God asked them to do. And each one of them is obedient and tries to get away. Even Jonah, will jump into the water or be thrown into the water to try to get away. So it's not something you really want to be called to. Sorry, I'm almost there. This is Abraham Heschel's daughter, Susanna Heschel, wrote a brilliant book called The Aryan Jesus. And it was about churches during Nazi Germany. And in it, on the cover of the book, is an altar, a Protestant altar, with the Nazi flag on the front of the altar and candles. And then inside the book is a picture of Cologne Catholic Cathedral with the Nazi flag hanging outside of the cathedral. So it was not unusual, it was unusual to have anybody against Hitler during that time. And a few people like Alfred Delp and Franz Jägerstätter and different people did go against it, but it was not the norm, as always. And that's one thing that I'd like to say also is when we're criticizing people for not doing enough or not being enough, like Pope Francis, well, he's good, but then he said this, so let's cancel him, or that. Think about what you're doing about Gaza, about Ukraine, about the things that we're living with that people will look back on, And then think about this man who is talking about murdering gay people in Africa, Pope Francis. And then he says something a little bad, a little bit off, and everybody jumps on him, So there's a line that says, be careful of what you do with your geniuses. Be careful of canceling your geniuses. And I think that's my father's introduction to the term divine pathos as the central theological element of prophetic teaching was drawn from a rabbinic concept, Zareh Gavoha, a higher divine need. God is not detached or the detached, unmoved mover of the Aristotelian tradition, he insisted, but is the most moved mover. The most moved mover, deeply affected by human deeds. Divine pathos indicates a constant involvement of God in human history, but insists that the involvement is an emotional involvement. God suffers when beings are hurt. So when I hurt another person, I injure God. This is Susanna Heschel talking about her dad. Hence, the prophet is neither a messenger, an oracle, a seer, nor an ecstatic, but a witness to the divine pathos, one who bears testimony to God's concern for human beings. So when I'm talking about Jim or Janine or, like I said, Ryan and Michael or anybody who's doing this work with you, for you, it's not just them. God has entered them and said, this hurts me too. This hurts me the way gay people are treated. Because up here, there's no gay or straight or anything. And down there, they're thinking there is. They're thinking all this is real, being gay, being straight, being this, being that. They actually believe that. So I've got to send some prophets down to yell at these people and say, the person sitting next to you is just a person, And all this stuff, how you can dream up stuff in your mind about people. Really bizarre. So I had to honor you, Jim, and honor you, Janine. And also I would like to say, do not forget the people that came before, like John McNeill. None of us would be here without John McNeill, who in 1976 wrote the first book on homosexuality and the Bible. And please don't forget the people that came before and honor those people. And there's a lot more. There's John Boswell, who wrote the most brilliant history of gay people in the world, and he died very young. So, enough about that, I think, and now we can start the pitches. So I always start out with the name of God. And when I first saw that, I had a book, when I was living in doing the AIDS ministry, I read a book called Meditations on the Tarot, which came out in 1986. And it was reviewed in Commonweal, and I went, tarot, that's supposed to be occult. That's supposed to be, and it was reviewed by Hans Urs von Balthasar. So I got on that subway so fast, I was down and got that book and came back, and I read it in 1 month, understanding about half of it. But he talked about the Kabbalah. So I went to the West Side Jewish store and said, do you have a book on the Kabbalah? They had one by Gershom Scholem. Now, if you go to the bookstore, there are this many books about the Kabbalah. But in the Kabbalah, this is man or human stacked up, the letters of God, or the word meaning God, or meaning like we used to say Yahweh, but it's in a human form. So what it says to me and about you all is you have this inside of you. And I always believe that everybody has a pilot light, no matter how bad things are, which is the spirit, which is your soul. And Ignatius would counsel his followers, have spiritual conversations. I mean, talk about something good, not about the elections, or something else besides the elections, but talk about the saints, talk about some beauty, talk about Hopkins, talk about any poet, Mary Oliver, whoever you like, and you'll see that flame begin to move, and you'll come out of that, looking down. So this is the masculine name of God. This is the feminine name of God. And I became aware of this in the 7th volume of the von Balthasar's Herrlichkeit, which is the volume on the Old Testament. And he talked about Shakan, God coming to earth, dwelling on earth, and that we call the Shekinah. And so I was hooked, and I went looking everywhere in the world for the Shekinah, and there was nothing written until Rabbi Leah Novick wrote a book called On the Wings of the Shekinah. So the Shekinah is the presence of God in the cloud that followed the Israelites through the desert and was a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And it also hovered over the Ark of the Covenant. So for many years, I gave this to Rabbi Leah. I went to visit her because I loved her book so much, and I gave that to her. And I thought, someday I'm going to do Mary and the Shekinah together, because I want to do Mary as a little girl looking at the ark and not knowing that she's going to become the ark. She's going to become the place where God is placed. So this was the background of the Mary painting. And that's the Shekinah coming in. And I almost just left it because I liked it so much. But then I thought, you have to put Mary in there. So there's Mary realizing in some way that she's connected to the ark. Now, icons, I'm just going to give you a little intro on what icons are. They are based largely on Fayum Egyptian portraits. And you can see that one on the right over there, that little boy at the Met, they have that. So the Fayum portraits were a face on a sarcophagus that was painted, and the paintings, they were really good. A lot of them were really good art. In fact, they look a lot like Manet paintings. But they were picturing these people that had died. And you can see the woman with the hand raised, looks just like an icon, and holding the Egyptian ankh. So the Christians saw these and they thought, maybe we should make our people into these, but we're not good artists. So they tried at first, and a lot of them were very rough or very, not great art. But the thing about icons is the most primitive can be the most strong. and the most detailed and wrapped up in everything perfect can be a stillborn. There's just no life in it. So it really depends on God, what goes into an icon. So people say, what's the difference between an icon and a painting? And so I always choose one of my favorite. The first time I ever came here was with my dad in 1963. And we went to the National Gallery, and I walked into the El Greco room, and I went, oh boy, we're not in Kansas anymore, These figures, they're like, and everybody goes, oh yeah, the stigmatism of the eye, that's why he painted everybody elongated. No, El Greco was an iconographer from Greece. Dominikos Theotokopoulos moved to Toledo, and when he got to Toledo, he painted electrocuted icons. That's what I call them. So there's the icon, and there's El Greco, and you can see the majesty of Christ. The thing about El Greco that's so phenomenal to me is his hands are often very feminine, and his bodies are often off, but you never feel that the figure, if it's a man, is feminine. But he incorporates all of this stuff into it, and he's electrified me for so many years. I've always loved him. So it just happens that today is my mom's anniversary. She died on August 3rd. And people are always saying to me, how come those icons of Mary are so sad looking? She's so mean looking, or she's so this or that. So I had to get this picture of Mom and my niece, Carrie, who's now 45. And if you look at Carrie, she's blissed out. She's wrapped around Mom, and that's her grandma. She's happy. She doesn't know what's going on. But look at Mom's eyes. She's looking at you. And she's slightly suspicious of what you're going to do to that baby. Don't hurt my baby. And that's exactly what Mary's doing in icons. She's holding on to him. And they say in icons, the child is actually comforting her by wrapping his arms around her neck. Whew. This is my niece. She died of cancer at the age of 29. So I put her up. I told myself I wouldn't give her Klimt, but I am anyway. But that's her baby, who's now 17. And she had him for a year and a half. And even though she had cancer and was not strong enough to lift anything, she would not put that baby down. Not for a second. And she's looking at you in the same way that I think the icons of Mary are looking at you. She's not going to be around to raise that baby. And she's looking at you, with that same. So that's an example. This is the Our Lady of Vladimir, Our Lady of Kiev. And that's the look of Mary, and then the child comforting Mary. So now we're going to go back to kindergarten. I'm going to show you the best thing I ever did. I haven't gotten any better, just a little bit more sophisticated, but people look at that and go, what was going on with that kid? That's very. So I went to Christ the King School in Denver, and it was run by Sisters of the Precious Blood. So right away in my little mind, precious blood, not gooey blood, not macabre blood, not, creepy blood, precious blood. What does that mean? What does that mean to a little kid? So I did a crucifixion of the blood's running down the hill. They're on Calvary. Mary Magdalene's at the bottom. Mary's at the side. These angels are dipped in blood going into gold. And Christ the King, since I was there, the crown is dipped in blood going into gold. On the left side, I didn't know is the Shekinah, and on the right side is the voice of God. And standing beneath the cross is St. Francis, not St. John, because I had a little book of saints by a Jesuit named Daniel Lord, and he had 4 books of saints. And he had that picture by Murillo, where Christ is, holding on or reaching down and grabbing St. Francis, and he's taken one hand out of the nail and he's reaching down and grabbing it. So I thought, well, St. Francis must have been there, and I had to learn later it was St. John. So that's my Christmas ornament of the Holy Spirit. And I don't know, I have no idea what that kid was thinking, It's so, because there's the shell and there's the Cairo and all this stuff, But what I'm trying to say is this stuff, or these images, were always in me much more than the words were. So during Mass, I'd be looking at the windows, and I don't think I heard a word, but I knew every single iconographic symbol for every saint. Agnes has the lamb, Lucy has the plate with the eyes on it, Agatha has the place with the breasts on it, Sebastian, of course, is arrows, and just everybody had their thing, and I loved it. So we're skipping now to many years later, 1974, and I was teaching at the school I went to, the high school I went to, Regis High School. And I hadn't chosen where I was going to go to theology yet, but it was more than that. I was going through a dark period. I thought it was dark then. Now it was, compared to what it's like now, it was brilliant light. But I thought I was going through a dark period, so I wanted to do a picture of Holy Saturday. And I was kind of obsessed with the day Jesus was dead. Later on, I would be reading Adrian van Speyer and Van Bie about that very day, that descent into hell that is often ignored in Christianity. And Adrian says something so outrageous that even the right wing kicked her out. And they kicked out Van Bie too for doing the, introduction to meditations on the tarot. So Van Bie and Adrian, they have no home in the church. They're hated by both sides. But Adrian said, when Jesus made the descent into hell, he didn't go in glowing with this mandala or mandorla, almond shape, around him, looking at these people he went to hell, and he experienced everything a person in hell experiences. And that raised the hackles of a lot of right-wing theologians. And Eddie Oakes, who is my dear friend, who is a great great theologian and died not too long ago, had written a book called Pattern of Redemption on Van Bie. And he fought with this person who was saying that Adrian and Van Bie were heretics and going back and forth, But anyway, so I wanted to picture the day when Christ died and the sun was eclipsed, and I wanted Father Arupe holding Christ, but I didn't want to put him in a cassock or something, because I wanted to show you his legs and the bend of the legs and the weight. And I always loved stripes since I was little because of Isaiah, by his stripes we are healed. And so I put him, and everybody goes, oh, is that a clown? And I said, no, that's Father Arupe. So I would show this to people, and I said, I was in this very dark time, and they go, hey, didn't you even notice that Christ is kissing the head of Father Arupe, even though he's dead? I said, no, I never noticed that. So I sent the picture to Father Arupe, and in the book that is All My Eyes See, he sent me back this long letter, and beautiful, because he was a saint, but beautiful letter saying that The vocation of the Jesuit is to bear Christ and to bear him at all times, whether he's the baby, you hold him, the elder prophet, you listen, or whether he's dying, you hold him again. This was done at the same time. I've always been fascinated by Francis and the stigmata, especially. And during the period when I was in New York, I was asked by the Third Order of St. Francis in the Bronx to come up and do a slideshow because it was the Franciscan year, 800 years since his birth, 1982. And I went up there and I said, hey, could I join? Could I be Third Order? And they said, well, we'll have to ask our minister. And he goes, yeah, sure. You know, a lot of different people were Third Order. So the thing about the stigmata to me, and I actually ended up going to La Verna, which is probably the holiest place I've ever been. I could hardly breathe when I was in there. I mean, my heart was just about stopping. And it happened to be the middle of winter, and it was snowing so bad, I went up for a day and had to end up staying there 3 days because I couldn't get out. But the thing I learned when Francis was up there, he asked for 3 graces before he died. The first is, I want to know, he's probably the only fundamentalist that's ever lived. I want to follow you completely. I want to know what it felt like when you were dying. Secondly, I would like to know not only what it felt like, but how could you love those people that did that to you? And thirdly, how can I love those people that have done this to me? Because he went to La Verna because he gave away his order. Because everybody wanted houses, and they wanted this, and they wanted that, and he said, I can't do it. And he felt like a total failure when he was up there. And the answer was, he received the wounds. Now, the most fascinating thing about the wounds, and I take it as our wounds, not just his, or your wounds, or your wounds. The most fascinating thing about it is the fact that the friars began to notice he was bleeding, and he couldn't walk down La Verna because it's a mesa. It's not very high. We have mesas in New Mexico like Acoma, and you can walk up them and down them, but he couldn't even walk, so they had to get a donkey. And he comes down, and they had to change the bandages on his side, on his hands, on his feet. And they would dip him in water and then feed the water to the sick animals and to sick people, and they'd all get better. So I thought, oh, you know, the wounds are for healing. Our wounds are for healing. We can heal while being wounded. And I was invited, my father, okay, where are we? Half hour? Okay. See, I was invited by my friend, Father Tim Martinez, to Taos to paint Francis receiving the wounds, because he said, we're losing Francis up here. We're starting to put him with birdies and bunnies, and he's becoming you've domesticated him. And he was a wild man. He was a fanatic. Even the Franciscans will say, Bill, we are talking about a fanatic here, you know? And he was pretty wild. So I was invited to paint that. And then next, of course, another wounded man, Padre Pio, whom I really, really love. And it's hard to sell him, I know. It's hard to sell some of these saints, but I'm not trying. I'm just telling you, I like him. And the reason I like him is he did the same thing with his wounds. His wounds, I mean, they'd unwrap him at night, and they'd take, they had 100 gloves or 200 or 1,000,000, I don't even know how many, that they kept. They had to keep all those, and those things are used for healing. And I joined the Third Order because I wanted to share in the charism of the wounds, which is Franciscan. No Jesuit has ever had the wounds, but I needed to share in that charism. I needed to, because it was so important to me. So this is a giotto of the seraph, and you can see the wound in his hand. And I made that. When I heard about the death of Alan Schindler, do you know who I'm talking about? Alan Schindler was in the Navy and was on a boat and was writing a diary and was a gay man. And this would be like 1993 or 94. And when the boat docked in Tokyo, he went in to the bathroom and was followed in by these guys, and they kicked him and beat him to death. So I wanted to paint the seraphic guardian of the blood. And I used the giotto as my kind of example. But this is for anybody who has died that we don't know what happened to them. You know, when I first moved to Taos, there was a kid that was thrown off the Gorge Bridge, and they took him out of his car, and I'll never forget it. He was literally holding on to the edge, and they were stepping on his fingers, and he went down into the water. So that was then, but this happens every single day to people. So this is the guardian of the blood saying from Genesis, you know, I have seen the blood, and also your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So that's my self-portrait at 1977, when Janine, I guess, began her ministry, I heard last night. And I had a lot of symbols around it, which I don't think we have time to go into. And this was my audition for America magazine. I was going to school at Pratt, and Joe O'Hare called me up because he wanted me to live there. And he said, I want you to illustrate for our magazine. Can you do a few pictures? So that was one of my auditions for America magazine. And I've always loved the ship, the church as ship. And that's a quote from Augustine about the church being a ship. And what it ended up doing for me when I was working with people with AIDS, guys would say to me, do I have to do an Oscar Wilde and convert before I die, you know? And I said, no, the church is a ship. It is not God. It is a ship. It carries you to the shore, which is God. God is on the shore. And you're like in a raft. You know, you're off the ship in a raft. Don't get back on the ship. If you want to go to confession, you can go to confession. But it's time to go to God now. And the church is not God, it's a ship. And then this is my other picture of the church, which I really thought a lot about during the abuse crisis. The abuse crisis first came out in Lafayette, Louisiana in 1991, and then it hit New Mexico in 1992. So we were aware of it way before Boston. And part of it is we had the Paraclete Center in New Mexico where people were sent from all over the country to make a retreat and repent for what they had done. Nobody knew that pedophilia was incurable and was essentially asexuality, that you could not change. I didn't know that, and I know a lot of people in the church did not know that. But they sent a lot of people to New Mexico, and then they went out into the parishes. So at that time, my image of the church, I thought, I can't think of it as St. Peter's. I can't think of it as a building. Can't think of it as the ship anymore. What's left? The bride. And what is it about the church that can never be touched, never be hurt, that you can't even get near? that she walks through history step by step, and she's pregnant with new Christians all the time, and she's walking toward the bridegroom. And on the side are all of these knives and things, people ready to kill her. But the radiance around her protects her, and you will never, ever touch her. You will never be able to hurt the bride. And at that time, I was reading The Splendor of the Church by Henri de Lubac, who had written that book when he was silenced by the church. This is a person that has meant a lot to me, and I'm going as fast as I can, but I just have to say this. Robert A. Johnson is a Jungian psychologist, and that's Robert A. Johnson in The Golden World. And the thing I got from Robert Johnson, he wrote he, she, we. He, the psychology of males. She, the psychology of females. We, the psychology of falling in love. And then he wrote Balancing Heaven and Earth, which was his own autobiography. And in it, he tells that at the age of 10, he was coming out of a pharmacy and was hit by a car, and his leg was amputated. So he was an introvert already, but he went even deeper into being an introvert. And decided at the age of 27 to go to Europe. And he's on the leaving New York. And he said, if I didn't have a wooden leg, I would have jumped right off that boat and swam back, because he talks about going way up and then going way down. And we all know that feeling. I'm very excited, and then all of a sudden you hit, uh-oh, what have I done? So anyway, this guy on the boat, this French guy says to him, I think you would like to be a part of Carl Jung's first class in Zurich. And Carl Jung said, I never want my stuff to be taught in a classroom. So I'm not having any part of it, but I'm not going to stop it. So Robert Johnson goes to the class anyway, and each student has a therapist, and his was Jolanda Jacobi, who was a wild extrovert. And Robert comes in and tells her, I had this dream about a Buddha and a snake and on and on. She goes, that's an old man's dream. You can't be having that. Bye. And he was 27. So she tells Emma Young. Emma tells Carl. Carl says, get that boy on the phone. He calls up Robert Johnson, says, Mr. Johnson, come over to my house immediately. I want to talk at you. So Robert Johnson's 27, and he goes over there and he's in front of Jung. And Jung goes, your dream means that you have been claimed by the inner life. You must never marry. You must never join any organizations. You must live on the slender threads that are given you every single day. And if you try, all that will be poison for you. So the rest of the book is him doing all of that, trying to, because he was 27, who wants to hear that at that age? But what he gave me is another way of talking about giving your life. If you're claimed by the inner life, anybody almost in a parish that I've been in that comes to me, there are always these people that have been claimed by the inner life, married or not. And they feel bad that they can't give everything to their family or their husband, and they feel that the other one can and that they can't. And it's because it's a way to talk about being claimed by God and being claimed by the inner life that's not Catholic. So if I explain that to them, they go, okay, I'm probably all right. It's Ignatius collapsing at the altar. And there was a period in my life where I was just doing these cartoons, drawings when I was at Pratt. And I read the spiritual diary of Ignatius, which impacted my whole life. Sobbing at Mass. He'll write, sobbing, could not get through Mass. Tears before Mass, just a lot of invasion by God into his poor body. And this is, Jim told me it's his favorite picture of Ignatius, but I wanted to do Ignatius as he really was in Rome, able to pray in the middle of a city, not, having to go off to some little corner. And one of my favorite Jesuits, I'm just showing this because I like him so much, Robert Southwell. And he wrote a poem called The Burning Babe, which Sting put into music on his Christmas album. Now, these are my Pratt pictures. We had to do a thesis, and my thesis was Prospect Park in Brooklyn. So I'm just going to show you a very few of them. So this was my audition to be a children's illustrator. I went around with my portfolio, which you did in 1980. You carried it through the streets and went to publishers, and they'd say, "What book have you done?" And they'd go, "None." And they go, "Bye. Come back when you get a book." And I go, "Well, how do I ever get a book if I can't get one?" They go, "That's up to you." So I'd leave, and finally I got a letter from Paulus Press. You can be part of a competition. And if you win that competition, you can do the cathedral book. So I did this drawing of a child building a cathedral. And I remember getting the letter. My landlord was standing next to me in Brooklyn, and I read it. I said, "We're sorry to inform you that," oh my God, I got it. And he goes, "Yay," he's really happy for me. And that began my whole career in illustration. And this is from the cathedral book, Notre Dame. And this is the Holy Child of Atocha. I did 3 legends of the child Jesus: St. Christopher, Appointments with the Little King, which is story of the Infant of Prague that was really out of fashion. I'm telling you, I won't even begin to tell you how out of fashion he was. And this Spanish legend of the child Jesus. Okay, there's Isaiah. And this is across the street from Xavier. This is the Holy Zebra showing up after the dignity masses that we used to have there. And I imagined, that no 2 zebras have the same stripes. They're all different. And I used to take, when I taught high school, I'd take the kids to the zoo and say, "Look at the zebras, look at all these animals, isn't that bizarre? I mean, could you ever make something like that?" And I wanted them to see the infinite variety of creation. And that's another cartoon of me drawing, kind of going crazy. And the devil's up there screaming at me, "You can't do it, you're no good, go back," And so I have him chained to the wall, and I'm wearing a fool's cap. And just kind of, what I realized is when you close the door and you begin to do art, you may close the door to outside noise, but then all hell breaks loose on the inside. And this is a picture of that, and I'm kind of like, This was my beginning to discover gay history, and I learned that this is called faggot. And I did this as a lithograph at Pratt, and I learned that the word faggot came from the fact that gay people during the time, for instance, of Joan of Arc, were wrapped up and thrown onto the fire with the faggots. And so the 2 things, Joan was actually burned very close to the ground. She wasn't lifted up high on a mountain of wood because it was more painful the way they did it. But they could have thrown gay people onto her too. And I wanted to discover what the gay history was. And this is my take on the sacrifice of Isaac. And it's called the Akedah. And I had to look up Amy because I knew she's speaking tomorrow. And I said, "I wonder what her take on the Akedah is." And she said, maybe Abraham was testing God. Maybe it wasn't just God testing Abraham. But I've always hated that story. And there are times when I was a young scholastic at Gloucester, and we'd have the Easter weekend. And I'd get up and leave if they'd read that story of the sacrifice of Isaac, because it was just hitting too close to me. And I said, why does this hurt so bad? Why can't I hear this? And then I realized I'm all three. I'm Abraham, I'm the angel that stops it, I'm the boy being killed. I want to kill the gayness out of me, and the angel wants me to stop, and I'm lying there willing to take almost any abuse. And so all three of those are me, and that's really what came out of this. And it's set in New Mexico. And I hadn't even been there yet. So Christ is the lamb barking in the thicket. He's not just, he's really going, stop it, stop it. And then Martin Luther King, who is another witness that I admire greatly. And I never finished this because I liked it unfinished, but I am always a drummer for justice. And in the background, you see a black Christ on wood with the fires of the KKK burning the wood. And this was my love of the book of Revelation because of the commentary of G.B. Caird that I read on the subways. And this is I, John, your brother in tribulation. And this is the same thing. I had a Jewish friend, and I said, will you pose for John for me? And he goes, yeah. So I had him pose. And this was when I began to work with AIDS, this was what I would hand out to people. And my totem was the deer that was wounded. And it says, return. Let's see if I can read that. Return and a light, for on the hill appears the wounded heart. And I realized that my middle name was an Old English name for deer. And then the bottom was part of Isaiah. This was the first painting I ever did about having to do with AIDS. And I associated Aloysius and Francis with AIDS for obvious reasons. And Francis, because he would make his novices work with lepers, because he said, the leper is Christ. You must meet the leper. And you won't meet him unless you meet him in the lepers. You won't meet Christ. So it's for you, your benefit, to be with the lepers. And so Francis is holding, these are the first two people I visited. Robert on the left, and then Jay, who was Robert was a gay man. Jay was a straight man who has Kaposi's sarcoma. And then Robert had pneumonia, died of pneumonia, and these are the first two guys. And I wanted to paint something. And they're sitting on the rainbow wasn't really have anything to do with gay at that time, but it's the rainbow throne from Revelation. And then on the left is hope coming out of suffering, and on the right is purification coming. We're all purified by fire. So those are the lilies, but all of us have to go through that fire. And this is Aloysius visiting Lenny, a man who is. And this is Francis, go rebuild my house. And the words above, are AIDS, leper, drug user, homosexual. And this is the AIDS crucifixion that began to cause trouble many years after. It didn't cause any trouble when I did it, but later on, I think it caused trouble because they were really after Jim. And they said, look, he has a friend who did this awful thing. And this was 1987. And I was commenting, I love the Della Robbias and I love the old Italian paintings where at the crucifixion, both the sun and the moon are screaming. They're coming out of the sky just screaming with horror. And Mary and John, and then there's this guy on the right holding the Bible up and yelling at Christ, just like the guy yelled at him, save yourself, save us and save yourself if you're really God. Then I was invited to do this, which was an extraordinary honor for me, that the people of ACT UP and the people that were really part of the really anti-church, that just hated the church and they hated anything to do with the church, hated Cardinal O'Connor, all of that. And they asked me to do this illustration for the first AIDS Candlelight Vigil, which quite an honor for me. So now we're at my teacher. And how much time do I have, Michael? 5 minutes? Okay. Well, anyway, Robert Lentz is the father of every modern iconographer. And he is the first person to ever do Black Christ. He's the first person ever to do Native people, Asian people, and this is the Navajo Madonna, which is one of my favorites of all of his icons. And he was doing this way before anybody, and he gets very little credit for it. He doesn't show up on Give Us a Stay. He doesn't show up on any of these publications. And he's the one. He is the one. This is his Black Christ, which is exquisite. Robert was a perfectionist, absolute perfectionist. And I remember he blew up at me one day and he said, this is not golf. You don't do it on the weekends. If you're not willing to paint 8 hours a day, I'm not going to teach you. And I kind of walked out thinking, well, that's the end of that, because nobody paints 8 hours a day but Bosch and Bruegel and, Grant Wood and Georgia O'Keeffe, but I'm not an 8 hour a day. And he goes, this is a job. Take it or leave it. So I kind of prayed and I got the grace. This is his Harvey Milk. Okay, 5 minutes. So we get to see just, sorry, I planned way too many icons, but the thing is that you can look them up, so I feel good about that part. This was the first female image of Christ that I had ever seen. And I remember looking in my book by Vladimir Ivanov, Rizzoli Publishers put out this book on Russian icons. And I opened it up to this picture, and I said, Robert, who is that? And he said, well, the letters say Jesus Christ. And I was like, oh, okay, we're not in Kansas anymore, This is a whole different world, and I'm going to have to read Russian theology, read Greek theology, find out who these Sophianic figures are, these figures of Sophia, these feminine figures. This is actually not especially a feminine figure. This is actually the young Christ, who's the 12-year-old, the one that went into the temple. But it means so much more than that. For instance, he's wearing a deacon's stole, or she. And St. Francis would say, preach the gospel always and sometimes use words. So this is a picture of Hagia Hezekiah, which means holy silence. Also, there are behind him, behind her, him, are these days of creation. And the final day is behind the neck so you don't see it. So that's holy silence, and kind of like a prayer position. And I will end with the last three icons of New Mexico, where I live. Our Lady of the Sandias, Christ of the Sandias, St. Joseph on the Rio Grande, and the Teenage Christ. I was invited to do this for an exhibit called The Day of the Dead. And I thought I want to do a Teenage Christ because Columbine had just happened. And I wanted to do a Christ who was wounded and then put a cemetery behind him. And when I was in New England, I'd always visit these old cemeteries, and they'd always have this skull with wings on the top of it, and I loved them. And so I asked the carver who made this altar for me, please, put that on the top. And this is Jesus the Morning Star. In the Spanish translation, in the Spanish Mass, it's El Lucero Radiante del Alba. I am the morning star, or I am the light of the morning. Okay, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Bill. Before we get to audience questions, so think of questions. Father Bill said he wanted to answer a few questions, so we're going to build time in for that. Could you talk about the new image that you painted? Just explain the symbolism behind it and why you chose that image for outreach?
Well, it's on the card. I mean, I wrote it on the back of the card just in case, I'd have to do this, but Jim invited me to do something about LGBTQ people. And first thing I thought of, this was before Francis said that thing about seminarians, and I really believe, this is my honest feeling, I'm just going to say it, all of that stuff that he was criticizing in the seminarians, buying the cassocks, buying the lace surpluses, et cetera, came about during Benedict's era. Benedict was in love with the giant mitres, the ermine capes, the red shoes, and that was taught to the seminarians. The clothes are, you buy the clothes, you do this. So I don't think Francis would dare say the truth. All this came about through Benedict. This is what the seminarians think of priesthood. I get to wear this cassock that buttons all the way down and has, a cincture. And I don't think it's the seminarians would have done that without Benedict's lead and wanting to bring back the old stuff. But anyway, when I thought of what is Pope Francis, how would I sum up Pope Francis' entire papacy? And it's the foot washing. The thing that stood out for me as being the most him. So I wanted to have Jesus, my first thought was Jesus washing LGBTQ people's feet. And then I thought, no, wait a minute. I want Francis washing Jesus' feet and then going on, because when he washes your feet, that makes you a disciple. And that's what happened at the Last Supper. So these are all waiting to be disciples. But then I couldn't put it on the ground. I tried to put chairs under them. I tried all this stuff, and I said, this is not working. And I went to a penance service at our church to hear confessions. They have these big screens up like this, and it says, here's the 10 Commandments. Did you do any of these things? And on, and it's endless. And then there's a little break when we go off to the pews to hear confessions, and they put up a picture of the cosmos. And I went, that's it. That's exactly what I need for the background, because what I'm saying is this hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. The discipleship hasn't happened yet, but it's happening right here. It's happening right now. You are all disciples now. And a lot because of Pope Francis, you are disciples. So.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple microphones, Kevin and Delaney. If you have a question, raise your hand. We probably have time for 2 or 3 questions, and Bill will choose who to call on. So
Okay.
have at it.
I can't see anybody, so you better choose, Michael.
Will you please write a book? Because as a 57-year-old, and I feel like I'm one of the old men in the group, you've just given us a social history of gay rights relative to the church that I think needs to be memorialized in a significant way. So please, if you would, write a book.
Well, they're just... Thank you. I just did. Darn it, I wanted to tell you some stuff, and I thought, no, you better not. That I had to cut out of the book, like the time that I went through. Well, this was in the book, but I went through aversion therapy, it was called. I went to a psychologist when I was 19, and he said, you can change. You don't have to be gay. You know, we'll go through aversion therapy. Now they call it conversion therapy. And I've been wanting to tell that whole thing, but something tells me you better not. You better just skip to the second part. So after the first part didn't work, which I won't talk about, the second part he said, well, I'm going to hypnotize you, and then you're going to almost throw up. So I'm going to show you pictures of men, and then I'm going to hypnotize you and talk to you. The bile is rising. You're feeling sick. You're about ready to throw up. You're about ready to throw up. You're about ready to throw up. Puts a picture of a woman. Now you're feeling better. You're feeling better. So I did that for several months, and all it made me want to throw up is when I went into the building. And every time I'd walk into the building, I'd go, oh, you know. So he goes, this is not working. We're going to do shock therapy. So I went to my novice master and I said, you know, can I do shock therapy? And he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I thought, well, if God wants to change me, I can't say no. So I'll do it. And he put electrodes on my legs and my... Sorry. He gave me 75 shocks of 110 volts. So the next time I went in and it was 45. And he said something that really empowered me, though. He said, I have never seen such a strong resistance to pain in my life before. And I thought, huh. It's probably a good thing. So I went to Father Walsh, my mentor, and he goes, you're what? You're going and being shocked and throwing up? What is this? You know, he goes, never go back to that man again. So I never did. So part of that's in the book of the social history of what's happened to gay people. And I wanted to show you Alana Chen, whom, because I did a picture of her, but she's also in the book. So next question.
My name is Ronan Kabursky, and I am a transgender Catholic. And around 5 years ago, I came to Washington, D.C. To visit family, and they took me to the National Gallery of Art. And it was there where I saw crucifix after crucifix after crucifix, and realized that maybe there was something more to the Catholic thing than I originally thought. And it was that experience that helped me to come back to Catholicism. And I was wondering, my question for you is, What was the hardest icon or painting that you've had to create?
Crosses. I've done a 6-foot cross for Loyola Marymount, an 8-foot cross for Our Lady of Loretto in Denver, and a 13-foot cross for our church in Albuquerque. And honest to God, every time I do a cross, all hell breaks loose. You get the cross when you do it. I mean, you get something. You don't get the real cross, but you do get a lot of hurt and anger and all this stuff just during the whole time of it. So you're right. It's the cross. Yeah, Mark. Is that you? I can't.
At Loyola University, and you had come there. But I remember you gave us the cards of the Matthew Shepard icon. And we just had that icon out in many different places, and it was a very, very important piece for at least a half a dozen students at Loyola Chicago. Could you just speak a little bit about your experience, the process of doing that amazing piece of work?
The one for you?
No. The Matthew Shepard.
Oh,
The Matthew Shepard.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was commissioned by Maryknoll magazine. They were doing a Lenten issue on modern day passions. And one of the Maryknollers, Joe, who was an editor, called me up and he said, I want you to do Matthew Shepard. And see, he's on here. Let me see if I can get to him quick. Yes. So, having been born in Colorado is pretty bad for gay people. But Wyoming, that's Brokeback Mountain. And I grew up, I've never felt unsafe in New York like I have in Denver as a child. I mean, there's something about that feeling that for me always felt danger. So I know that they had put him on a deer fence and they had left him there on the Feast of the Holy Rosary, October 7th. And I read that his mom said, I hope he wasn't alone that night. I hope he didn't die alone. And in Catholic symbolism, Mary is the moon and Mary is the reflected light of the sun. She's the moon. So I wanted his mother to be represented by the moon and that he wasn't alone. And the state patrol woman who found him the next day thought that he was a scarecrow because the only part in his body that wasn't red was tears. And so that's Matthew Shepard, yeah. Yes? What is my source of personal strength, and how do you find yours? Well, I try to connect with God all the time. And as I get older, it just shocks me. Mass even shocks me that it didn't when I was 30. I was ordained at 29. But now I'll get to the creed, and everybody, stands up. We're going to do the Nicene Creed. We believe in God. And I go, wait, stop. Did you hear what we just said? We believe in God. And I can't believe the words that are coming out of. So I said, that should change all of our lives. And they're waiting for me to go on with the creed. And I said, I'm sorry, but at this age, I'm just shocked by these words, just a simple thing, like light from light. So I will tell them before we do the creed, I say, I'm going to use an Ignatian thing. Ignatius would give you a retreat and say, stop when you get to a point that really knocks you out. So I'm going to give you a passage, but if you stop at the angel Gabriel came down from heaven and you go, whoa, and you go back to Ignatius and say, I stopped at the angel Gabriel coming down from heaven. That was too much. And I told people, listen to these words, light from light, God from God. You know, his kingdom will never end. All this stuff is so powerful. So I find myself listening a lot to music and for prayer and being nourished by that. And for you, it'd be very hard for me to tell you what to do, you know, or tell you, except that if I could have shown them, I put up many guides, Rachel Carson, Alana Chen, Diana Ortiz especially. I wish I had had the time to talk about her. But people that have lived through things that are way beyond anything we ever lived through. But it's like, you know, in Revelation where John says, I ate the book and first it was bitter, and then it turned out sweet. Or Ignatius saying, I read the lives of these knights and I loved them, and then I got depressed afterwards. Then I read the saints and I was depressed while I was reading them, but I felt happy afterwards. I think the saints are alive and they're real and they're really in your life. And if you can find one that you like, maybe it's Edith Stein for you, you know, maybe it's Therese or Ignatius or whatever, then let them be your spiritual director if you don't have one. Sorry.
Thank you for your presentation. Thanks for answering the questions. Thank you for being here and for the beautiful image that you provided for outreach. Let's give Father Bill another round of applause.
Thank you.